This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, on the X-Zone TV show, coming soon to screens of all sizes. On the X-Zone TV show, we'll investigate UFOs, ghosts, alien abductions, demonic possession, psychic phenomenon, angels, lake monsters, Bigfoot, unsolved mysteries, and all subject matter from within the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology, and much, much more. The X-Zone TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, www.xzonetv.com, is a rel-mar McConnell media company and Airplay Media production. Unwilling to be the government's deadly assassin, gifted psychic Kahara Mitchell went AWOL and ended up buried under rubble in the wake of a great tsunami. She regained consciousness far from Earth on the medical ship of a Daguerreonian intergalactic fleet. Has she been rescued or abducted by aliens? The Chalice of Carrie, Kahira O'Donnell's latest paranormal science fiction romance, is the passionate story of an Earthwoman and her destined mates, twin kings from another galaxy. Kahara uses her gifts fighting alongside Lords Rom and Ra in a war that will determine the destiny of galaxies. The Chalice of Carrie by Kahira O'Donnell is now available at KahiraO'Donnell.com or at Amazon.com.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And if you'd like to listen to the X-Zone 724-365, you can go to our main website at xzoneradiotv.com. My guest this hour is a good friend of the X-Zone. Frank Joseph is his name. And Frank has published more than 12 books about the lost civilizations of Atlantis. And he's written about Atlantis more than any other writer in history. Since 1980, he has been researching Plato's sunken city, traveling around the globe in search of relevant clues. Now, Frank was the editor-in-chief of Ancient American, an alternative science magazine, from its inception in 1993 until his retirement 17 years later. His work has received awards from the Midwest Epigraphic Society, the Burroughs Cave Society, the Ancient American Artifact Preservation Society, and Japan's Savants Society, where he was cited as a professor of world archaeology. He's been interviewed by yours truly, Shirley MacLaine, Whitley Strieber, my friend Art Bell, and numerous other radio hosts. And Frank lives today in the upper Mississippi Valley. For more information, the website is www.ancientamerican.com. And Frank Joseph, welcome back to the X-Zone. Great having you with us, Frank.
Thank you very much, Rob. It's really great. It's very generous of you to let me be a guest on your show all these past years. And it's a real testimony, I think, to the staying power of the X Zone, and what a wonderful success it is. I'm very glad to know that it is successful.
And it's successful because of guests like you, my friend, because over the years we've talked about so many ancient civilizations. We've talked about the Mayans. We've talked about Atlantis, of course. And I'd like to talk to you tonight about your new book that is out. It's available on Amazon.com and bookstores throughout the United States and Canada. It's entitled Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age. Tell me about it, Frank. You've got my curiosity up.
Well, it seems like there are two elements in this title, doesn't it? That
sure does.
Contradictory. They don't make sense. We're all told that we're going through global warming these days. Not exactly an ice age. And what on earth does all this have to do with Atlantis anyway? Well, actually, it has a lot to do with both of these subjects. I found some years ago when I became interested, as most people are in today, in the climate problem or the problem of a global warming, supposedly. There are arguments for and against it. And in my own research and the contacts I have with colleagues on either side of this issue, I learned that there's an alarming consensus amongst geologists and paleoclimatologists about the real nature of what is going on. And it's not really discussed at all in the mainstream media. And what I'm referring to is the consensus. That's the only word that comes to mind on this, which is a pretty rare thing amongst scientists, amongst people anywhere, that you have a general agreement on something, and that is that we are right on time, if not overdue for, an ice age. It has nothing to do, or actually relatively little to do, with whether human beings pollute the earth or not. And this ice age is now understood. We now understand why ice ages take place, why there is this major shift in the temperature of the northern hemisphere that's been going on for so many hundreds of thousands, actually millions of years. And that is because of the Earth's rotation about the sun. When the Earth rotates, it also wobbles. And between every 26,000 and about 150,000 years, this wobble creates an attitude between the northern hemisphere and the sun. Of course, we know the rays of the sun are direct. And when the northern hemisphere, where we are, is inclining towards the sun, we have warm temperatures. And when it disinclines, when it bends back away from the sun, then we get extremely cold temperatures. And for the past 12,000 years, in other words, since the end of the last ice age, we have been in a relationship to the sun that is getting its direct rays in it. So we've been through a warm phase. This is what's been going on since the glaciers finally retreated. But now that wobble is inclining the northern hemisphere away from the sun and its direct rays. The only lack of consensus among scientists now is not that this ice age is not impending, because it is. Some even argue that it might be here right now. We're in the very beginning of it. The only disagreement they have on this, and it's not even much of a disagreement, is when and how fast will this next global epoch move.
All right, Frank, stand by. We've got to take a 2-minute commercial break. We'll be right back. Exonation, Frank Joseph is my guest. AncientAmerican.com. Don't go away. We'll be right back. How would you like to be able to read other people's minds? Well, the next best thing is here. When you know how to read a person's name, you know how the person thinks, feels, and behaves. Each letter in our name holds a key to unlock our true essence. Our name contains both our gifts and challenges in this lifetime. Nemology science discovers personality secrets hidden in the placement of the letters of our names, including the first and last impression people remember about us. Sharon shows us how to interpret the arrangement of letters as outlined in her book, Know the Name, Know the Person. Sharon Lynn Wyeth created nemology science after 18 years of research and testing her theories, and has supported thousands of people around the world in understanding themselves and others better. You'll enjoy Sharon's unique teachings as she shares her system to learn the gifts behind your given birth name. Even if you don't like your birth name, there are jewels in this book. If you're thinking of changing your name, ready to name your child, or wanting to get along better with others, this is the book for you. If you'd like to improve your relationships and change your life for the better, get the book today, Know the Name, Know the Person, or visit www.knowthename.com. That's www.knowthename.com. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, on the X-Zone TV show, coming soon to screens of all sizes. On the X-Zone TV show, we'll investigate UFOs, ghosts, alien abductions, demonic possession, psychic phenomenon, angels, lake monsters, Bigfoot, unsolved mysteries, and all subject matter from within the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology, and much, much more. The X-Zone TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, www.xzonetv.com, is a rel-mar McConnell media company and Airplay Media production. Welcome back, everyone. Frank Joseph is my special guest this hour. www.ancientamerican.com. Frank has a new book out. It's entitled Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age, and it's available online at Amazon.com and at brick-and-mortar bookstores in Canada and the United States. Once again, his website, ancientamerican.com. Frank, the coming ice age, does this have anything to do with global warming, or does global warming have anything to do with the warbling of the earth that you're talking about? Or are they two separate, different issues?
They're not separate. Of course, nothing that human beings can do can affect this wobble that takes place.
Right.
But what we can do, and what we have done, is that we are responsible for global heating. Not global warming, it's referred to as global heating. And what I found is the most convincing evidence for that was stated very recently by James Lovelock, who is this British naturalist. He's probably the most famous naturalist, certainly in the 20th century. He's still writing books. He's in his mid-90s, and still coherent books, too, amazingly. And this latest book of his, he makes a very strong case for the heating that is taking place on our planet. But what this heating is doing, and I'll make this as briefly as I can, is that the heating, of course, is being vectored to either pole, the North and the South Pole. And these particulates that are involved in the heating process are being concentrated at both poles. And there are some very alarming trends going on both at the North and the South Pole, the Arctic and the Antarctic. But the one that we're concerned about here is regards something called the jet stream. The jet stream was discovered only as recently as about 75 years ago by the Japanese during World War II, or just before the war. And the jet stream is this very powerful current of air that vectors around the edge on either side sometimes of the Arctic Circle. And it is this jet stream which brings very cold temperatures to North America. If it is depressed by the rising temperatures now taking place at the Arctic, what the Arctic temperatures are doing is they are pushing further south this zone, this jet stream, which have brought near catastrophic wintry conditions that we here in the United States underwent just a few months ago. New England, Boston, and so forth in the upper Middle West had record-breaking cold and stormy temperatures, and that is caused by the suppression of the jet stream, which brings these temperatures, by the global heating. So it's a strange thing. We're having heating going on, which is causing extremely low temperatures to be experienced in North America, especially in the continental United States. And what this is doing, in and of itself, is pretty bad, of course, but it is playing directly into the accumulation of conditions that are building up into this next glacial epoch, which we have either entered in upon or else will soon enter in upon. And it is adding to the severity of these conditions. So what we are undergoing is not really global heating. What we're experiencing is climate deterioration. It's not a matter of heating or cooling. It's climate deterioration. Deterioration in relationship to human life. Mother Earth couldn't care less. One species more or less means nothing as far as life on Earth is concerned. We're no different from this nature's point of view. But nonetheless, that is the ice age that we are definitely going to go into, whether or not we accelerated it. But we're making it worse and sooner. And that's what the idea of the coming ice age. Now, how Atlantis figures into this, I wanted to make a parallel. That's why I used Atlantis, as Plato did, as a historical example. The Atlanteans are accused by Plato and others of having destroyed their own civilization by overuse of technology. The Atlanteans are portrayed many thousands of years ago, living on this ideal island in the mid-Atlantic, as a very virtuous people, technologically very advanced, and they were the first modern civilization with empires and armies and all the rest of it, and that the Atlanteans eventually became so wealthy, became so self-indulgent, that they elevated technology from a mere servant status into divinity. In other words, they worshipped technology. The technology became so good at technology that they regarded it as something that could fix anything. You can commit any kind of sin, you can do any kind of transgression, but if the technology is there, we can make good of it. And it's that moral decline that Plato talked about that spelled their doom. And I see parallel with that in our civilization. I don't mean just Canadian or American civilization, but Western or world civilization, human civilization, whatever you want to call it. And I see that as happening here, that we have taken upon ourselves to do whatever we please with the environment or to our fellow human beings because the technology is so advanced and getting more advanced all the time that we can do anything. It's that kind of arrogance that leads to self-destructive behavior. And that's the parallel that I'm trying to draw in the book.
Do you know what? I agree with you that the parallels are uncanny. And talking to the guests that I do about the future of robotics, the future of nanotechnology, they are heading in the same direction that you just described, like taking technology and putting it above us.
Well, it excuses abominable behavior. Technology in and of itself is neither good nor bad. As a matter of fact, it can be very excellent, it can be wonderful. Technology has done very great things.
Sure has.
But as Edgar Cayce, the great psychic, the sleeping prophet of the 20th century, said, technology makes a splendid servant, but a very cruel god. And there's this indefinable barrier that society sometimes transgresses, and where we no longer regard technology as something that serves us, but rather something that eventually we serve. And when that happens, you're in for major social dislocation, to put it nicely. And I think that's what's happening today. I think it's the human nature that cycles itself every few thousands of years. It's interesting that in all the stories of Atlantis, beginning with Plato, and the stories that are told by native peoples around the world, just about, they all basically describe the same story, whether it's Native Americans, like the Ojibwa, which have this wonderful story of Atlantis, or the pre-Columbian Mexicans, or the Basque of Spain, the Pyrenees. They all talk about their ancestors coming from this great society that suffered a natural catastrophe, and somehow they deserved it. Somehow they had committed some moral transgression that involved their self-destruction. And I think that there's an element of truth in this mythological cycle that's being made available to us. That human beings continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. That's the futility of history, I suppose. To recognize what human beings do, but unable to correct it.
Frank, I know you've traveled around the world in your search for Atlantis, the evidence that so many people want to see in order to believe. What have you discovered during your search? What evidence have you found?
Well, I think the most persuasive, among the the evidence for Atlantis as a physical, real place, and at the same time among the most general, was found by the United States inadvertently when the United States Air Force dropped 2 atomic bombs by mistake in 1970. One of the bombs landed in Spain, did not explode, thank God. It was retrieved very quickly, although that area in Spain outside of Barcelona is still restricted. No one's allowed to go there. We've shelled out a lot of bucks to make sure that relations with Spain are all right. But then the other bomb, dropped by the same bomber, went much further off the coast of Spain, somewhere they thought they were trying to find this other bomb. Went into the ocean. That's a lot harder to find. And the Soviets knew about this incident just about as fast as it happened. And so they dispatched a research vessel in 1970 to go look for our atomic bomb because they wanted it before we could get it. And it was in international waters, so anybody could grab it. Well, luckily, the United States Navy found the atomic bomb before the Soviets did. But nonetheless, when the Soviets sent out their research vessel, it was their top vessel. It was the Alexander Petrovsky. The Alexander Petrovsky was from the Soviet Academy of Sciences, and it had all state-of-the-art underwater search equipment because they wanted our A-bomb. And instead of finding the A-bomb, because we beat them to it, they found an underwater mountain called Mount Ampere. They didn't discover it. It was found by the National Geographic some years before, but it had never been really examined or investigated. But now the Soviets did, looking for our bomb. And instead of finding the atomic bomb, they claim to have found the remains of a city, which had large grand staircases, columns, walls, and other man-made features. They did not release their find for about another 12 or 13 years, about 13 years later. And when they did release this information, relationships between the Soviet Union and the West were so bad, so appalling, that no cooperation was possible between the two. And when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, all that information was lost, was purposely destroyed. There was a feeding frenzy of burning and trashing all kinds of records because it could be used for intimidation of one thing or another, and that information was lost. However, it was publicized to a large extent by the New York Times. It was a front-page story at the time. And so we do have some information on that. Now, to answer your question, that site that they found back in 1970 and explored for about the next 13 years or so, that site is exactly, well, I can't say exactly, but generally enough within the geographical parameters that Plato placed Atlantis. Atlantis, he said, was a large island outside the Straits of Gibraltar. He called them the Pillars of Hercules in those days. And outside the Straits of Gibraltar, he said that the large island of Atlantis was a circular island surrounded by high mountain range. Well, if you go to this area where the Soviets were and Mount Ampere, you find that Mount Ampere, where the Soviets found this archaeological material, is part of a large island, a sunken island that is circular and has a ring of mountains around it. So it's not only do we have a physical description matching Plato's, but also within the general sphere of influence that he mentioned as well.
All right, stand by, Frank.
Finding archaeological materials.
Frank, we've got to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Please stand by.
Yeah.
Exonation, Frank Joseph is my very special guest, www.ancientamerican.com. And Frank and I will be back on the other side of this news break. Don't go away. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, on the X-Zone TV show, coming soon to screens of all sizes. On the X-Zone TV show, we'll investigate UFOs, ghosts, alien abductions, demonic possession, psychic phenomenon, angels, lake monsters, Bigfoot, unsolved mysteries, and all subject matter from within the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology, and much, much more. The X-Zone TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, www.xzonetv.com, is a rel-mar McConnell media company and Airplay Media production. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com, or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464. With each new extreme weather event or terrorist act, it becomes increasingly obvious that we live in uncertain and challenging times. We all buy car insurance. Why not collapse and catastrophe insurance? Matthew Stein, an MIT-trained engineer and green builder, has written 2 outstanding books to help people prepare, plan for, and deal with everything from minor situations lasting a few days to full-on collapse. Matt's first book, When Technology Fails, is a manual for self-reliance, sustainable living, and surviving the long emergency. This massive book covers the gamut from first aid and emergency preparedness to alternative healing, renewable energy, primitive living skills, and 18th century technologies that could be critical to your comfort and survival in a long-lasting crisis. Matt's second book, When Disaster Strikes, is a comprehensive emergency preparedness handbook and survival guide. When Disaster Strikes is an essential item for every family's go bag. Both books are available at all usual sources. There's a wealth of totally free information posted at whentechfails.com, and author-signed copies may be purchased at mattstein.com. That's www.whentechfails.com and www.mattstein.com. Welcome back to the X-Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell. Frank Joseph is our very special guest this hour. His website is ancientamerican.com, and he's got a new book out I think this makes more than 12 books. Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age. It's available at Amazon.com and brick-and-mortar stores in the United States and Canada. Once again, his website is ancientamerican.com. Frank, let me ask you a question. Why is it that Plato was the only person to write about Atlantis?
Well, he wasn't. His is just the most complete of all of the accounts of Atlantis that survive from the classical world. There are numerous other accounts of Atlantis that go back not only in ancient Greece, but in many other parts of the world. They're not as detailed as his, because we have to understand that around 500 A.D., when the Greco-Roman world collapsed, with the fall of the Roman Empire, that almost all of the knowledge of that period and of all those thousands of years before was lost, was deliberately destroyed. That's why we call it the Dark Ages. And the Renaissance was a period of time that came, in the late 14th century, in which scholars began to pick up the shard pieces of what had remained, and by doing that, we had a rebirth of knowledge in the West. And so that's why even Plato's account is not complete. It's in two dialogues, but when he's just about to describe how Atlantis was destroyed, the account breaks off. So we don't have that. But as far as other accounts of Atlantis, there are numerous other accounts in ancient Egypt, in the Book of the Dead. Over in Mexico, they have something called the Popol Vuh, or the Book of Council, which talks about the same story. So there are many other pre-modern sources for accounts of Atlantis.
Is there any account of Atlantis in the Bible?
Well, the Bible is one of those books where you can make it say anything you want, sort of like a scholarly ventriloquist dummy, and you can make it justify all kinds of things. And so, yeah, I guess you could say yes, but I don't really go to the Bible, the Old Testament, I guess it would be, for much verification. We have to understand that the Jews, when they were in the Babylonian captivity, that they picked up a number of mythological and religious ideas that they later incorporated into their own Mosaic religion. The word Mosaic, of course, it's a very good term that the Jews use. It's bits and pieces of things that you sort of put together into a mosaic form. And part of that was the story of the flood. The Jews had no traditions of the flood whatsoever until they went into captivity in Babylon, where they first learned of the flood. And instead of Ziusudra or Gilgamesh, they came up with somebody called Noah. And this was a common practice in the ancient world. So I guess to answer your question, I really don't go into biblical sources that much. They're interesting. They might be even enlightening to some degree, but there are better sources.
When we look at the ancient times, like in the time of Atlantis, we hear that Atlantis was further ahead than any other civilization, or that's what we're led to believe. Why didn't they survive? Why hasn't there been some document somewhere that unequivocally says that this is X marks the spot where Atlantis is?
Well, because there's not going to be any surviving document. Imagine if a place like the city of Chicago was hit by a hydrogen bomb and then buried under the waters of Lake Michigan for thousands of years. What could we expect to survive after all that time? So that's an excellent question that you asked, but there are very rational explanations why that information wouldn't be around, and that's why the science of archaeology was invented, to learn what we can about previous cultures that were unable to leave something as perishable as a written record. And but I think that there are bits and pieces in the written records, along with the physical materials, that create a pretty good idea of what we were looking at. As far as our technology is concerned, yes, it was the highest of its time. Yes, they did have some forms of technology that are superior even to ours, and some technology and some rather relatively humble products. For example, glue. the glue that was used in the ancient world by various peoples, and that can be the process for this can be traced way far back, was superior to any kind of glue we have today. I just learned about this only, I think it was last Sunday, from a colleague. Apparently, some two pieces of metal going back about 3,000 years ago have been found, and apparently as part of some armor somewhere. And these pieces of metal were glued together. They were not riveted together or fastened in some way. These two pieces of metal, and that's very difficult to do today, to get two pieces of metal glued together.
Sure.
But the glue that was bonding these two pieces of metal, about 3,000 years old, was still holding them together. So the glue was taken the hardened glue was taken to 3M in Minnesota for examination. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the glue was so old that they couldn't break down all of its composite parts molecularly. But nonetheless, the scientists at 3M said that if we had glue like this, it would put our adhesive technology way far ahead of what it is now. And here's some glue that was being used by the ancients 3,000 years ago. We don't know what it was. And there are numerous examples of incredibly high technology that the ancients had. Some of them were Atlanteans, some of them were others, like the pregnancy test that the ancient Egyptians had 5,000 years ago. We didn't have a pregnancy test until 1920. It had been completely lost. So there are indications of amazingly modern technologies, and some even a little bit higher than we are experiencing today in the industrial world.
Well, let me ask you this, Frank. Are we rediscovering our future?
Wow, that's pretty good. We could have a long discussion on that. Well, according to modern physics now, we have multiple futures.
Yeah.
We don't have just the future. We have potentialities to create all kinds of great and terrible things. Mm-hmm. So I would like to think that our society is headed for a golden age. Certainly we don't have a golden age now, but I guess maybe for some people we may have a golden age. But I would like to think that the future holds greater things than we've ever known so far. I have a hard time accepting that human beings have gone through so many millennia just to snuff out, not to exist anymore.
What do
that dumb faith that we're going to survive.
What do we know about the social structure of Atlantis?
Well, we know that it changed a lot, but even at its end, when things were really in decline, they were quite an open society. The reason why I say that is Plato's description was that even the most sacred areas of Atlantis were not off limits to common people. I'm referring to the central island of Atlantis, which was the sacred island, in which the emperor had his residence. And the centerpiece of this island, the centerpiece of the entire civilization, was the Temple of Poseidon, this incredibly huge and beautiful building, something like over 600 feet long, over 100 feet high, decorated with silver and gold and everything. And this was open to the public on various holidays, and there were a lot of these holidays. We also know that women had a very high position in Atlantis, and they were queens, for example. They could become queens, and under certain conditions, they became the chief political power on the island. This was very anti-Greek. So for Plato to describe a place like this where women had political power was considered barbaric and certainly not civilized.
Well,
people have, of course, accused Plato of saying, Plato just created his ideal state. Well, that fact alone shows that he did not. It was not the thing you could do by saying, women were politically equal to men, but they were in Atlantis, and that's how he describes it.
They were also equal in Egypt.
That is kind of a too broad an assumption, because we know that there were certain dynasties where women achieved power. But for the most part, no.
Really?
Women were completely secondary, and by making them secondary, even though they were nominally queens, they became extremely conspiratorial, like Queen Tai and so forth. But then there were other dynasties in which Queen Hatshepsut did become the undisputed political power on the throne. And that was kind of a golden age for Egypt at that time. But after she died, there were efforts to completely efface her memory. Her statues were destroyed, and Egypt went back to being quite the patriarchal society that it had been. So it did go. You have to remember that Egypt lasted a long time.
Sure
from
did,
about 3,500 BC to about 30 BC. That's a long time, and so they had plenty of time to experience all kinds of instances of political vagaries. But Atlantis appears always to have had this situation where women were acknowledged, if not as equals, certainly as very powerful personalities.
Where did the Atlanteans come from?
I think that the Atlanteans were a hybrid people. It would appear that the original landmass of Atlantis was part of a peninsula. Mm-hmm. And we now know, oceanographers will tell you, that in fact, before the close of the last ice age, there was a peninsula extending from what is now Morocco out into the Atlantic Ocean. And that when the ice age ended and the glaciers melted, sea levels were raised by 300 feet or more. And when that happened, this peninsula mostly went under the sea, leaving its highest areas as mountains and islands. And people that had migrated from North Africa out onto this peninsula before it sank were the original inhabitants of these Atlantic islands. This is long before they were called Atlantis. And then later on, seafaring peoples from Western Europe, like the Solutreans or the Magdalenians, people who lived about 15,000 to 18,000 years ago, they sailed out to these islands in search of mostly hunting sea mammals and things like that, and they intermarried with the inhabitants of what later became the island of Atlantis. So I think that like any thalassocracy or any seafaring people, it became quite cosmopolitan, quite mixed over time.
What do you think we can accomplish by finding Atlantis?
I think what we can accomplish by finding Atlantis is seeing the parallels between what happened to them and what could be happening to us. History is hardly anything more than a fairy tale, unless you can make something of it. Well, what is the utility of history? The utility of history is that, first of all, it grounds us on the earth. I mean, just compare yourself. Let's say we were to cut off all knowledge of your experiences that you've had over your life. You would feel disoriented and not competent. And it's the same thing goes for a people. If they're cut off from their past, from their experiences, they also lack competence. The more grounded you are in your past, the more experiences you have, the more competent you are to run your life now, and the more confident you feel in the future. The same thing for an individual as for an entire species. So I think we need to be grounded in our past. And how is it that a modern civilization, so much like ours, with its empire and its great industry and its high culture and its wealth, how is it that it didn't last? What did they do? What mistakes did they commit? What series of mistakes did they commit that reduced them to something regarded as nothing more as legend today? Is that how the future is going to regard us, as the legendary people of North America? It's happened before. So I think it's incredibly valuable that we understand the historical parallels, especially now.
It's been my experience, Frank, that people do not pay enough attention to history because until we start paying much more attention to history and learning from our mistakes, how in the name of heaven can we ever progress?
And we just keep making the same mistakes over and over again, and we blunder through the world. So many Americans, people in the United States, cannot understand why the United States is so much hated throughout the rest of the world. All these people are just envious of us. Well, the United States has made, the United States government, our politicians have made some very crucial mistakes over the past few decades, which have led to this situation. And we can't just blame all of our troubles on everybody else. We have to take responsibility. And that's where history comes in. If people knew the history of the Balfour decision, for example, in regards to Israel, or if people really knew what happened after the Korean War, Then they would understand why people hate the Americans, and how we could remedy that, how we could win them back to our friendship again. But because we don't know that, we don't understand our own history, Americans have such a poor sense of history, we blunder from one crisis to the next. And I agree with you 100%, Rob. I think that history is vitally important. We have to know where we've come from so we can understand how we got here and where we're going.
It only makes sense to me, and it makes sense to you. I can't understand why the rest of the people, history is, all right, to hell with history, let's just look at what we're going to do in the future. And without knowing the past, you're not going to have a future.
Yeah, that's it exactly. Garth, history is very political. And you have to know, you just can't go along with the politically correct versions of things. You have to know what really happened. That's really all I've done in my books. I want to know what really went on. I don't care about people's theories, least of all my own. I want to know what really happened.
Exactly.
And we have to know the best we can so we can apply those lessons to... we can't even apply those lessons. I mean, you and I are relatively powerless. Well, you've got a lot more power than I. Your voice is heard by millions of people for all these decades, which is a great, wonderful thing. But at least, the very least history can do is make sense of the world to people like you and me. And that's a great benefit. That's a great wealth. It really enriches one's life.
Frank, stand by. I've got to take my final...
clearly.
Frank, I've got to take my final break. We'll be back in 2 minutes, X-Zone Nation. Don't go away. What if someone told you could live to be 120? Would you believe him? What if he told you the Bible guaranteed it? All you needed to do was follow his rules and buy his products. Would you do it? What if you invested 20 years of your life in him? What if he tested his substances on your child? What if your child became brain damaged as a result? Meet Dr. Tyler Belknap, a fast-talking Texas admin turned health guru. At the helm of a vast health food and supplement empire, he has established himself as the authority on nutrition and longevity. But what his followers don't know is that his products are laced with bizarre psychoactive substances from genetically modified plants developed in his very own secret lab. No wonder his customers can't stop using them. Tyler Belknap will stop at nothing to keep his edge in the market, even if it means experimenting on children. Chasing 120, a story of food, faith, fraud, and the pursuit of longevity, a novel from the pen of political cartoonist Monty Wolverton, is an easy and entertaining read full of rich characters and intrigue. It hits home in a world filled with all kind of hucksterism and offers a glimpse of what can happen when GMO technology falls into the wrong hands. Chasing 120 by Monty Wolverton. Get your copy today at www.ptm.org/120 or on Amazon.com.
Nita Hickok is an expert in exorcisms, psychic warfare, soul healing, angelology, soul retrieval, demonology, energy healing, long-distance healing, astral healing, and much more. Nita is an interfaith minister because she believes all gods and goddesses are valid and that they are part of one divine force that is incomprehensible to us who are incarnated upon this earth. Nita has been doing astral healing, distant healing, spirit release, exorcism, house cleansing and blessings, soul restoring and revival, psychic vampire removal and curse removal, and much more for over 40 years. For more information or to contact Nita Hickok, visit her website at www.astralhealer.com. That's www.astralhealer.com.
Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. Exonation, Frank Joseph has been my guest this hour. www.ancientamerican.com, and his new book is entitled Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age, and it's available at Amazon.com and brick-and-mortar stores in Canada and the United States. First of all, Frank, I want to thank you so much for all the hard work that you've done over the years. Thanks for being a good friend of the X-Zone Nation. How close, Frank, do you believe we are to finding Atlantis?
Well, I believe we're this close. I just turned 70 years old not too long ago, and when you get to that point, you realize how much time have you got left, and do you want to die with any regrets, you know? And so I'm going to try to avoid one of the regrets by actually going to look for the place. And I know it sounds crazy and fantastic, but the technology may exist now. The underwater technology may exist to go back to that same place where the Soviets were back in the 1970s. And that's what I'm trying to do. I've got together a dream team put together already. I've got a ship, I have a captain, I have a crew, I have state-of-the-art equipment,
Wow.
I have university-trained operators. And so I'm slowly putting this together, and my goal is to take this dream team out into the Atlantic, back to Mount Ampere where the Soviets were, and see if we can find a scrap, a physical scrap of what evidence is down there. And if they found it, maybe we can too.
Well, my philosophy, Frank, has always been the only difference between a dream and reality is making it happen. And if James Cameron, who was born in Chippewa, Ontario, can find the Titanic, you, Frank Joseph, I have no doubts, will find Atlantis.
Wow. I won't be able to sleep after that. That's fabulous. Thank you, Rob. That's a very beautiful thing to say, and at least I'll give it a good shot, and you'll be the first to know if I do find it.
Well, thank you very much, Frank. Any more books coming out?
I'm going to take a breather for a while. Too many books, not enough readers.
So when do you anticipate taking your quest into finding Atlantis?
Well, I'm just about ready now. I need good weather conditions, and of course money is the same old problem. This is not that expensive an expedition, believe it or not, because our goal is simply to find artifactual material, to document it, but to leave it untouched, and then bring in the archaeologists and let them go to it. So it really isn't, we're not talking about a multi-zillion-dollar expedition. So I'm in the process of raising funds for it, and hopefully I will do that. Unfortunately, you need money to do anything, and underwater archaeology is about 5 times more expensive than archaeology on land, as you might imagine. So I'm hoping to do it next year. It's possible. It's possible I can go next year.
Wow. Are there any organizations, any museums, any foundations that would be more than happy to help fund a great opportunity like this into finding out what the truth is?
Well, I found that those organizations that are anxious to help are the ones with the least financial wherewithal. People all naturally want to have some kind of a return on their investment, but the only thing I can offer is making one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time, and I don't know how they can cash that. There's no money involved in this, unfortunately, for myself. I'm not interested in the profit or anything of that kind. I just want to go out and find it. So I have to find private investors, and that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to find private investors. And, I'm working on it. It'll happen. If not me, somebody else will do it.
Well, Frank, as always, time with you goes by so fast, my good friend. First of all, I want to thank you so much for all your years of hard work, dedication to finding the truth. Congratulations on your new book, Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age, and I look forward to the next time you're back here with us in the X-Zone. So until then, Frank Joseph, take care of yourself, and God bless.
God bless you, Rob.
And please, say hello to your wife, Laura, for me.
say hello to your wife, Laura.
I shall. Exonation, Frank Joseph has been my very special guest this hour. AncientAmerican.com, his newest book, Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour as we continue here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away now.